What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Pioneer video. And while I wanted to get a tier list video out for the Pioneer format, I think with wanting to put more work into it and the fact that the format is pretty well shaken up, while we do see Izzet Phoenix back at the top of the metagame, and it probably is the best deck in the format, there are plenty of other decks that are definitely giving it a run for its money, and I think they're really interesting. There is some old archetypes that are seeing a new lease on life in the format now that Amalia and the Sorin Imperious Bloodlord is gone, and I wanted to kind of take this time to round out the week and kind of show off some of these decks and kind of talk about them, just because, again, they are kind of these fresh faces or, old faces putting on a new face, since we are in a spooky Duskmourn season. So I want to go talk about them today, and that's going to be kind of the premise of this video, is going over 3 of the new decks that I think are really interesting, that are definitely worth checking out and playing if you are getting into the Pioneer format, or maybe you've been around the format for a while, and you just kind of want some, a new taste in your mouth from playing the Izzet Phoenix decks. But of course, before we get too deep into the decks that we are planning on looking at today, if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos from me, where we talk mainly about the Modern and Pioneer format, as well as doing some other fun, longer form videos just to kind of break up, a lot of the competitive talk that we do around here, and it kind of loosely based onto it. So, that's a plus too. But if any of that interests you, please consider subscribing and ringing the notification bell so you know when those videos get posted. It's a free, easy way to support me and my content. And if you want to kind of support any further, you want to interact a little bit more, you can follow me on Twitter. I do have my handle in the description down below, as well as a link to my Discord server as well, if you wanted to kind of get in contact with me there. I know I want to kind of try to meet up with some people in, at the regional championship. I think it'd be really cool just to be able to interact with some people face to face. So, if you want to kind of stay in the loop on like what's going on and things like that when it comes to the regional championship, join the Discord server, follow me on Twitter, all that fun stuff. With all that said, let's go ahead and take a look at our first deck that is, I think, arguably could be one of the better Pioneer decks in the format, if not one of the best decks to kind of take in the Pioneer format. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at our first deck. So the first deck we're going to look at is the Rakdos aggro deck. This one in particular by Hamuda, who won the Pioneer Challenge on September 8th, going 10-0, of course, getting first place. So this deck got a few things from the Bloomborough set, which is, kind of helping out with this deck to have some pretty fast kills. So we see cards like Heartfire Hero, which is kind of a standard all-star, I would say at this point, one of 4 of them, the most played deck. So, of course, that means that it is a standard all-star. So it's a 1-mana 1/1 that has the Valiant ability that whenever it becomes the target of a spell or ability you control for the first time each turn, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and when it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. So its effect when it dies, it's going to grow. The more you play these pump spells, you have plenty of other pump spells and some other things to kind of use this Valiant ability. You're going to be able to get it to be very huge over the course of a few turns, and then if your opponent tries to block it, with some of the other spells, you're going to be able to trample over, as well as getting to deal massive amounts of damage to them. Of course, we see kind of some usual suspects in Slick Shot Show Off. So this is essentially like a Rakdos version of a Slick Shot Show Off deck. Also with Emberheart Challenger, which is another one of these Bloomborough cards that's 2-mana 2/2 Prowess Haste. Whenever it becomes a target of a spell or ability, each turn you exile the top card of your library, and until end of turn, you may play that card. So it's a way that you can kind of get some card advantage in these decks, as Wendy's tries to sell me on their saucy nugs, and I will get some later, just not now. Some other kind of weird cards that we haven't seen a lot. Dreadhorde Arcanist, which is essentially like a Snapcaster Mage, but you have to attack, and of course the spell has to have less power, so not even anything close to a Snapcaster Mage, but it allows you to cast a card without paying its mana cost, and then, if it would go to the graveyard this turn, you exile it instead. We have Callous Sellsword from the Wilds Veldrain set. While you're not usually casting this card for its, for the creature side of it, the Burn Together says you target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to any other target and then sacrifice it. So you can kind of use this on like a Heartfire Hero, like kind of the combo where you can target it and, do your thing, because I can't find the Sellsword. So you end up dealing like 4 or 5 damage with this, and then you sacrifice it, deals another 5 damage. So chances are like Heartfire Hero and Callous Sellsword with the right mix of pump spells can just solo your opponent. which is pretty crazy. And, being a sorcery, whatever, you're not going to be able to, sacrifice it to deal a bunch of damage if your opponent has like a removal spell. But you do have plenty of opportunities to be able to just kind of like throw this at your opponent, which is kind of the idea. Of course, Swift Spear is another kind of usual suspect of this deck. So the spells that kind of make this all happen. Kamado is like easily one of my favorite red cards, and I think for like the mono red slick shot decks, this was like amazing for the fact that you play this on 1, you can play this on 2, you can kind of blank some of the like 2 damage spells in the early turns. Of course, people are kind of moving more towards like Fatal Push and Bitter Triumph and things like that. But any of these, giving a creature like -2/-2, whatever the case may be, any of those kind of like damage based removal spells, Slick Shot's going to be able to play around. While also having that extra point of power, you're going to flip this and cast a bunch of spells. Your opponent is going to have a very, very bad time here. But I really like Kamado in this deck. Claim to Fame is a card that, well, back in the days when it was spoiled, it was thought to be like, this is going to be the card that gets Death Shadow spoiled. This is also the one where I'm going to claim the Saucy Nugs, and hopefully they will lead me to fame somehow. But getting a creature back with convert mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then the other half of it you can cast from your graveyard to give the creature +2/+0 and haste, which is also going to help. If you get back a Heartfire Hero, you're going to be able to claim it, bring it back, and then cast Fame on it. It's going to end up being a 4/2 haste creature that, again, is going to deal a ton of damage to your opponent, either by attacking or your opponent blocking it, and then, them being super sad when they try to block and kill it. Reckless Rage is another card that we've seen. You get a big enough Heartfire Hero, you target your Swift Spear or like your Dreadhorde Arcanist, things like that, even your Emberheart Challenger. A lot of your creatures are going to survive getting dealt 2 damage by your own Reckless Rage, so it essentially gives you like a 1 mana deal 4 to a creature that, again, is going to have some synergy with your Prowess creatures and your Slick Shot Show Off, and of course a little bit of synergy with Dreadhorde Arcanist, because you're going to be able to attack, you're going to be able to flash it back because it's a 1 mana spell, it has 1 power, and then you're going to be able to target it with half of it, and then use the other 4 damage to hit your opponent. Monstrous Rage is one of the best pump spells, basically giving your creature +3/+1 for the turn that you play it, and then giving it a permanent +1/+1 and trample until, essentially the enchantment falls off or, the creature dies. Again, which works like really nicely with Heartfire Hero, because this is going to grow pretty big early and often. The fact that you could play this on turn 1, turn 2 you play a Monstrous Rage, it's going to be like a 5/3 or something like that, 2/2. 3/3 from that. Yeah, it's going to be a 5/3 with trample, and then it's going to be a permanent 3/3. So then it's just going to be dealing tons and tons of damage, and of course, the more you target it, the better it's going to get. Might of the Meek is another kind of new pump spell. Ends up giving a creature +1/+0 if you control a mouse. It's going to give it trample regardless, and it gets to draw you a card. So you can kind of keep like churning through your deck. Pretty simple, 20 lands, 40 spells, and then some interaction in the sideboard for some of these other decks, and then a way to kind of play a little bit more mid-rangey with like Hazoret and Obnixilis, the adversary. Also getting to play Thoughtseize as well. This deck I really like, again, because it's one of those decks where game 1, it's going to be pretty focused on just trying to kill your opponent, while maybe in some matchups that's going to be good, it's going to be bad, whatever the case may be. This is going to essentially punish your opponent if they're not really playing a lot of cheap interactive removal. If you're able to kind of avoid getting swept up by, some like very cheap wraths that exist in the format that, of course, I cannot remember, because there's specifically the 3 mana white enchantment that would be pretty good against this deck, because it doesn't actually kill Heartfire Hero. But nonetheless, this is an aggro deck that is trying to do what the mono red slick shot decks are trying to do, the Gruul slick shot decks. It's now just able to play some other threats that are very, very aggressive, that wear a lot of the rage pump spells that are going to give your creatures trample very, very well, and of course the kind of explosive finish of dealing potentially tons of damage to your opponent, thanks to Heartfire Hero plus the burn together adventure part of Callous Sellsword. So really neat deck. I've played against it a few times with the next deck that we are going to look at, and I've sort of kind of struggled against it, but there's just so many different opportunities to kind of interact with this deck, and I've really enjoyed watching it being played. I know Randy's played quite a bit of it, and I really like it myself personally. But this next deck we're going to look at, I've been enjoying quite a bit, and might be my pick for the regional. So next we have the Jund Sacrifice deck. This is a deck that did exist in Pioneer before. A lot of people played it. This was kind of like the main difference of like if you're playing kind of like Rakdos mid-range or if you're playing like Rakdos Sack. This deck is Jund essentially for like 2 Yigra and Haywire Might. So essentially, yeah, like this is definitely, you know, but I'm technically playing a Jund deck and literally playing like 4 cards, 5, I guess, that care about being a different color other than like the main colors of the deck. But this is essentially Rakdos Sack with some fancy new things added. We see from Bloomburrow, Scavenger's Talent. This card has been absolutely amazing the times I've played it. A creature, whenever one or more creatures you control dies, you create a food token. This only triggers once each turn. For 2 mana, you level it up. Whenever you sacrifice a permanent, target player mills 2 cards. And then for 3 mana, at the beginning of your end step, you can sacrifice 3 other non-land permanents. If you do, you return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. So this all builds up to the card Yigra, Eater of All. So for 5 mana, it's a 6/6 cat with Ward of Sacrifice of Food. And other creatures are food, so even your opponents are food artifacts with, you know, pay 2, tap, sacrifice is permanent, you gain 3 life. Whenever a food is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, whether it's yours or your opponent's, you put 2+1/+1 counters on Yigra, Eat Overall. This culminates into essentially a combo of sorts, where if you have, you know, something like Scavenger's Talent, you just need to have it to at least level 2, but level 3 allows you to get back Yigra and kind of set this up. So you can have a turn where you go to the end step, you have Scavenger's Talent on level 3, so you sacrifice 3 other non-land permanents, you get back a Yigra, as long as you have a Cauldron Familiar in play and a Cauldron Familiar in your graveyard, or even if you just have some sort of food, whether it's another creature or an actual food token laying around, you can sacrifice the food token to get back a Cauldron Familiar. You know, your opponent loses 1 life, you gain 1 life, doesn't target. You can then sacrifice this Cauldron Familiar to get another one from your graveyard to essentially loop them, and while you're doing this, Yigra is going to get counters. You can technically mill your opponent with Scavenger's Talent, or you can kind of just mill yourself to try to kind of find another Cauldron Familiar, whatever the case may be. So you're able to do that and essentially loop these. You're able to drain your opponent for a ton of life or mill them out, whichever one ends up being quicker. You know, you can kind of do it on Moto, but in paper, obviously, once you kind of establish this loop and your opponent has no way to break it up, you're going to be able to mill their whole library, meaning that if they kind of let this happen, you're going to be able to look at their cards and see kind of like what they're playing, or maybe some of the different options and stuff they have going on. And then, of course, just drain them if they're able to somehow gain infinite life or a ridiculous amount of life. Of course, with Mayhem Devil as well, like this is also a way that you can kind of deal additional damage, but dealing damage to any target, so you're able to kind of pick things off the board as well. So this is essentially kind of the Rakdos Sack deck, but now with adding a third color to it, you are able to have this sort of infinite combo with Yigra and 2 Cauldron Familiars to infinitely kind of kill your opponent. Or if Scavenger's Talent somehow isn't on the battlefield, as long as you get Yigra in play, you're able to drain them with a Scavenger's Talent. Ideally, up to level 3, you're going to be able to mill your opponent out as well. Some other things this has going on, it has Fatal Push, Go for the Throat, is like very cheap creature interaction. That's been kind of the important thing when playing against like the Rakdos decks in particular, because those have been very popular to just kind of like keep a lot of their creatures off the board. Claim the Firstborn has been awesome because you just take their huge creature, you kind of nug them with it, and then sack it to the Witch's Oven to get food counters. You're able to get the like damage trigger from something like an Emberheart hero or whatever the mouse is, and you're able to deal the damage to them. Also, if you're playing against like mono green, if you steal their giant or whatever, or I guess their troll, then you're able to put it on one of your things and then be able to make the 4/4 later, or just add 2 green, which isn't very relevant for this deck, but, you know, ramp is ramp. We'll take it any way that we can get it. Deadly Dispute is a way to, like, get some sacrifice, a little bit of a sacrifice outlet while also making a treasure token and getting to draw cards. Fanatical Offering, doing essentially the same thing, except creating a map token instead of a treasure token, which obviously the treasure token's a little bit better for us because we can pay, you know, is essentially we can sacrifice it, get a mana, and get some synergies with our Scavenger's Talent on level 2 and Mayhem Devil. Overall, I have been really enjoying this deck. It's been a lot of fun. You'll like be surprised how many times that you like don't have to necessarily like infinite combo. This deck was already pretty good on its own, in the fact that with Scavenger's Talent plus Ygritte, you have essentially inevitability, where if your opponent can't interact with the graveyard, they can't interact with the Scavenger's Talent, or they can only deal with one, not the other. There's plenty of ways that you can just get a ton of Cauldron Familiars, make a ton of food tokens, get them all back, drain your opponent, attack with them, sacrifice them, end up dealing with them, or just having Mayhem Devils and pinging your opponent to death. This deck is a whole lot of fun. I definitely recommend playing this deck, and I've been enjoying it quite a bit, to where I think that this is probably the deck I'm taking to the regional championship. I have some more testing I want to do, but this is definitely a front runner for me. With that said, let's go ahead and move on to our last deck before Wendy still tries to sell me on more nuggets. So finally, here we have Selesnya Angels. I'm going to keep this relatively quick because this is a deck that has existed and kind of pops up from time to time in the format, especially when there's kind of a decent shakeup in the format. So this is pretty straightforward. You're trying to play a bunch of Righteous Valkyries, gain a ton of life so you can get the +2/+2 buff on all your creatures, and it's going to make your mana dorks absolutely insane. Gyada is also going to help toss a ton of counters onto your creatures by giving them +1/+1 counters for each angel that is already on the battlefield. So Gyada herself is an angel, so your Inspiring Overseers are going to kind of come into play. They're going to end up having an additional +1/+1 counter. You're going to gain a life, draw a card when this enters the battlefield, and of course stacking up to like Resplendent Angels and other Righteous Valkyries and things like that. You're going to get a lot of stuff going on here, and growing these creatures to insanely big power and toughness. And Resplendent Angel is also going to help you make some 4/4 angels, of course, with Resplendent Angel. If you already have a pretty high life total thanks to Righteous Valkyrie, when you play a Resplendent Angel, you're going to gain 5 life when it enters, and if this is around at the beginning of each end step, if you gain 5 or more life that turn, you're going to make a 4/4 angel. So this is going to be like, boom, you're going to make essentially a 6/6 and then gain 6 life, and make it very hard for your opponent to get you to a low enough life total where Righteous Valkyrie is going to lower it, or where you're going to lose the buff essentially from Righteous Valkyrie. Of course, having multiples of these is going to make them stack and gain you even more life, again making it even harder for your opponent to do so. And then you're able to kind of blast ahead on board thanks to cards like Kayla's Reconstruction and Collected Company. Reconstruction, a little bit more expensive, but you get to dig an additional card deeper and have the potential to have even more creatures put on the battlefield, while Collected Company is like good old reliable. Look at 6, put 2 creatures with converted mana cost 3 or less onto the battlefield. Having like a ton of just blow up potential with getting 2 Righteous Valkyries and gaining 4 life off of each of them. And if you have a pretty high life total already to begin with, but not enough to kind of push you past that threshold, you're going to have these. They're going to give creatures you control +2/+2, effectively having each of these having +4/+4. 2 6/8 at instant speed is pretty good. Pretty simple mana base, cheap nonetheless, and some really good sideboard cards. Just make it a fine option to kind of pick up and play in the Pioneer format if you're looking for something cheap that does have a lot of ability to just kind of run people over, honestly. But yeah, that's Selesnya Angels. That's going to do it for this video. Those are 3 decks that people are kind of starting to play in the Pioneer format. They're relatively popular. Some of these more popular than others, a lot more influenced by what Bloomburrow has offered to kind of push them into relevancy. Selesnya Angels is really the only one not really getting anything from Bloomburrow, but nonetheless still just a very good deck that has kind of popped up and seeing a lot more play thanks to, again, the kind of fall of the Rakdos Vampires deck and the Amalia combo deck. But that's going to do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like on the video. Comment down below what you would like to see next. Always taking ideas. If you want to, get a hold of me like directly or talk to me directly, the best ways to do it. Join the Discord server, follow me on Twitter, all that. Feel free to DM me. Things like that. Especially with any business inquiries, is I would like to kind of do some collaborations and stuff. I think that would be kind of a neat thing to do. But anyway, that's going to do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope to see you all in the next one.